In the outskirts of a forgotten village, where the moon's light barely touched the ground, stood an ancient, decaying mansion. No one in the village dared speak its name anymore. It had been abandoned for centuries, or so the villagers hoped. At its core, hidden deep beneath layers of stone and rot, lay a labyrinth, known only in whispers as the labyrinth of lost souls star. Those who entered were never seen again, at least not as they once were. The legend told of an ancient sorcerer who built the labyrinth to imprison the souls of those he had cursed. Some said they could still hear the cries of the damned, echoing through the night air, carried on the wind like a distant wail. No one dared go near, but curiosity and fear always had a way of pulling people closer. On a cold October night, 3 friends, Lucas, Evelyn, and Daniel, stood before the mansion's gates, their breaths hanging in the air like specters. The moon was full, casting long, sharp shadows across the overgrown path leading to the entrance. Lucas, always the brave one, pushed open the rusted gate with a screech that echoed like a warning. The others hesitated, but followed him inside. The mansion was worse than they'd imagined. The walls were smeared with old blood, now turned black, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. It was as if the place had been waiting for them, for anyone foolish enough to cross its threshold. The wooden floorboards groaned under their weight, and the deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the darkness became, swallowing the weak beams of their flashlights. Then they found it, the entrance to the labyrinth. A staircase descended into the earth, carved from cold stone, spiraling down like the twisted spine of some ancient beast. Their hearts pounded as they stood at the top, staring into the abyss below. But something drew them in, an unseen force that gnawed at their minds, whispering promises of hidden truths, of power, of forbidden knowledge. The walls of the labyrinth were alive, flesh-like, pulsating, as if the structure itself was breathing. Every turn felt wrong, every step deeper felt like a descent into madness. The torches mounted along the walls flickered and danced, casting grotesque shadows that slithered across the floor. The air was damp, and the further they went, the heavier the atmosphere became, like an unseen weight pressing down on their chests, choking them with fear. It wasn't long before they started hearing it. The whispers, soft at first, like a breath at the back of their necks, but soon they grew louder, more distinct. Voices, dozens of them, crying, begging, screaming. They spoke in languages long dead, in tones so twisted they were barely human. Join us, you're one of us now. Evelyn felt something brush against her arm, a cold, slimy touch that sent a chill down her spine. When she turned, there was nothing there, but she could feel it, something watching them, lurking just beyond the reach of their light. Lucas, always the fearless leader, turned a corner ahead of them. This way, he called, his voice unnervingly eager. But when Evelyn and Daniel followed, they found him standing still, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. Before him stood a wall, but not just any wall. Embedded in the stone were faces, human faces, frozen in expressions of eternal torment. Their mouths gaped open in silent screams, their eyes empty, yet somehow full of unimaginable agony. One of the faces was moving. Lucas stumbled back, his hand shaking as he pointed at the wall. Did you see that?" he stammered, his usual bravado shattered. Evelyn approached, her eyes locked on the face in the wall. It twitched, its hollow eyes rolling in her direction, and for a moment, she thought she saw her own reflection in its twisted features. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath them. The labyrinth was changing, reconfiguring itself like a living organism. The passageways twisted and turned, sealing off exits, creating new paths that led deeper into the darkness. It was as if the labyrinth itself was alive, playing with them, toying with their sanity. Daniel screamed as something cold and wet wrapped around his ankle, dragging him back into the shadows. Evelyn and Lucas lunged to grab him, but it was too late. He disappeared into the darkness, his screams echoing through the labyrinth, then fading into silence. The labyrinth had claimed another victim. Evelyn's breath came in ragged gasps, her mind reeling from the terror. They had to get out, But every direction looked the same, endless corridors that stretched into blackness. She could still hear Daniel's final, desperate scream, and it felt like the walls were closing in on her. And then, from the depths of the labyrinth, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, growing closer. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't human. The shadows seemed to thicken, and from them emerged a figure, a grotesque amalgamation of the damned souls trapped within the walls. Its body was twisted and malformed, made up of countless writhing faces, all crying out in eternal suffering. It moved toward them, its many mouths whispering, laughing, taunting. You're next. The creature advanced, its form a nightmarish mass of writhing bodies, limbs tangled and fused into something beyond comprehension. The faces embedded in its skin contorted in agony, mouths moving in silent screams as they stretched toward Lucas and Evelyn, desperate to drag them into the same endless torment. Evelyn stumbled backward, her flashlight flickering in her trembling hands, the beam of light barely piercing the suffocating darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest, every beat louder than the next. Lucas, normally the one to take charge, was frozen, staring at the monstrosity that slowly closed the distance between them. Run, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Lucas, run, But Lucas didn't move. He was transfixed, his face pale, eyes wide with terror as if he was staring not just at the creature, but into something far deeper, a glimpse into the abyss. Evelyn grabbed his arm, yanking him with all her strength, pulling him away just as one of the creature's many limbs shot out toward him. The surrounding air grew colder, a deathly chill that seemed to seep into their bones. They ran, their footsteps echoing through the endless maze of corridors. But the labyrinth was shifting again, twisting itself into new shapes. Every turn they took led them deeper into its clutches, every corridor darker and narrower than the last. The walls seemed to close in on them, pulsating with a sickening, fleshy warmth. The whispers were louder now, louder than ever, each voice pleading, mocking, condemning. You can't escape, no one leaves the labyrinth, Suddenly, they hit a dead end. The wall in front of them was slick with some dark, glistening substance that smelled like blood and decay. Evelyn's pulse raced as she whipped her head around, desperate for another exit, but there was none. The creature was getting closer, its distorted shape barely visible in the gloom, its many faces smiling in twisted anticipation. Lucas backed up against the wall, his breathing ragged. "There's no way out," he muttered, his voice hollow. "We are trapped." Evelyn's mind raced. She could feel the oppressive weight of the labyrinth pressing down on her, could hear the faintest hints of voices, faint and distant, yet so close it felt like they were whispering directly into her ear. Her skin crawled as she realized. Those weren't just the voices of the dead. They were the voices of people who had come before, explorers and fools who had wandered in, just like them. Some sounded familiar. We are not dead yet, Evelyn said, her voice trembling but filled with a fierce determination. We have to fight. But before Lucas could respond, the wall behind him shuddered. The grotesque, fleshy surface began to bubble and twist, and then a face, Daniel's face, pushed through the wall, its mouth opening wide in a silent scream. His eyes, hollow and sunken, stared at them with a look of unspeakable horror. Help me, he mouthed, his voice weak and distant, as if it were being dragged from the depths of some dark abyss. Please, it's too late for me, Evelyn recoiled in horror, stumbling backward as the face of a friend twisted and melted back into the wall. The labyrinth was consuming him, turning him into part of its living nightmare. She could feel the panic rising inside her, but she forced herself to push it down. They couldn't give up now. Suddenly, from behind them, a chilling laughter echoed through the corridors, a sound so unnatural, it seemed to vibrate in the very walls. Evelyn's heart nearly stopped as she turned to see the creature emerge fully into the dim light. Its body, a mass of rotting flesh and tortured souls, was impossibly tall, its many faces twisted in grotesque smiles, each one a reflection of eternal pain. And at the center, high above the writhing mass of faces, was something worse. A singular, pale, featureless face, its eyes black and empty. It didn't speak, didn't scream, it just stared, as if looking straight into Evelyn's soul, waiting for her to break. "Don't look at it," she screamed, grabbing Lucas by the arm and pulling him into another corridor. But it was useless. The labyrinth was closing in, the walls shifting, cutting off their escape. Asterisk, "We can't outrun it." Asterisk, Lucas gasped, his voice filled with desperation. Asterisk, "It's everywhere." Asterisk, and then the creature began to speak. But it wasn't just one voice. It was hundreds, maybe thousands, all overlapping, blending together in a sickening harmony. Asterisk, "You are home now." Asterisk. Asterisk, "Stay with us." Asterisk. The voices clawed at their minds, each word pulling them deeper into the madness. Evelyn could feel her grip on reality slipping. Was this how it ended? Would they become part of the labyrinth, just like Daniel? Suddenly, she saw something, just a glimpse of light in the distance, a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. Without thinking, she dragged Lucas toward it, her legs screaming in pain, her lungs burning with every breath. The light grew brighter, and as they turned one last corner, they found it, a door. It was small, old, and covered in strange, ancient symbols. But it was real, and it was their only chance. Asterisk, "Go!" Asterisk, Evelyn shouted, pushing Lucas toward the door. But as they reached for the handle, the creature lunged, its massive, rotting hands reaching out from the darkness, its many mouths opening wide in a final, twisted scream. The door creaked open, just as the creature's hand closed in on them. Evelyn flung the door open just as the creature's grotesque hand grazed the back of her shirt. She could feel its icy, slimy fingers brushing against her skin, sending a wave of revulsion through her body. With a scream of pure adrenaline, she shoved Lucas through the doorway and dove after him, slamming the door shut behind them. For a moment, everything was still. The air was heavy, and they could hear the creature on the other side, scratching, howling in frustration. But it couldn't break through. They were safe. For now, the room they found themselves in was unlike the rest of the labyrinth. It was small, almost claustrophobic, but bathed in a pale, eerie light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The walls were covered in strange symbols, ancient runes that pulsed faintly, as if alive. In the center of the room stood an altar, carved from the same dark stone as the rest of the labyrinth, but different somehow, older, more sinister. Lucas collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. His face was pale, his eyes wide with the lingering horror of what they'd just escaped. Evelyn fell to her knees beside him, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. For a moment, they just sat there, staring at the altar, trying to process everything. But something was wrong. The air in the room was too still, too quiet. And then Evelyn realized there were no more whispers, no more cries of the damned. It was as if they had left the voices behind. But something about the silence was even more unnerving. "We have to get out of here," Lucas muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn nodded, but something about the room kept pulling her attention back to the altar. There was something on it, a book, ancient and bound in leather that looked almost like skin. Its pages were yellowed with age, covered in the same strange runes that lined the walls. She reached for it, feeling a compulsion to open it, to understand what it meant. As her fingers brushed the book's cover, a sharp jolt shot through her hand, as if the object were alive. She recoiled, but it was too late. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The room started to hum, a deep, vibrating sound that seemed to come from the very stone beneath them. Lucas scrambled to his feet. "What did you do?" he shouted, backing away from the altar. I don't know," Evelyn stammered, her eyes wide with fear. "I didn't mean to." The walls of the room began to shift, the stone melting and reforming, like the labyrinth itself was waking up. The door they had just come through dissolved into the wall, sealing them in. The hum grew louder, deafening, and the symbols on the walls flared with an intense, blinding light. Then, as suddenly as it had started, The noise stopped. The light faded, and the room was plunged back into silence. But something had changed. In the center of the room, where the altar had stood, there was now a figure, a man, or at least, what used to be a man. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were black voids, like the creature they had just escaped from. He wore tattered robes, and his body seemed to shimmer, as if it were only partially in this world. "Who are you?" Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. The figure's hollow eyes turned to her, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Asterisk, "You have disturbed the labyrinth," Asterisk, he said, his voice a low, guttural rasp that seemed to echo through the walls. Asterisk, "And now, you are mine." Asterisk, Evelyn's heart sank. She tried to move, to run, but her body wouldn't respond. It was as if the very air around her had become thick and oppressive, holding her in place. She could feel the figure's gaze boring into her, cold and merciless. Asterisk, "What do you want from us?" Asterisk, Lucas demanded, his voice cracking with fear. The figure laughed, a sound that chilled Evelyn to her core. Asterisk, "You have entered my domain. The labyrinth is alive. It feeds on souls, on fear. And now, it will feast on you." Asterisk, Evelyn struggled to breathe, her chest tightening as the weight of the room pressed down on her. She could see the walls shifting again, the stone rippling like liquid, and in those shifting walls, the faces returned. Daniel's twisted, tormented face was among them, his hollow eyes pleading with her. But there were others, too. Hundreds, maybe thousands of faces, all trapped, all screaming silently. Asterisk, "No." Asterisk, Evelyn whispered, shaking her head. Asterisk, "We won't end up like them." Asterisk, the figure took a step closer, his smile widening. Asterisk, "You already are." Asterisk, without thinking, Evelyn reached for the book again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She opened it, her fingers flipping through the pages, her eyes scanning the runes that seemed to burn themselves into her mind. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she could feel something, an energy, a power, building inside her as she read. Lucas was screaming at her to stop, but she couldn't. She knew this was their only chance. The figure was advancing, his body flickering and shifting, his face twisting into something monstrous, something that no longer resembled a man. And then she found it, a symbol, glowing on the page, brighter than all the others. Without thinking, she pressed a hand to it, and the room exploded with light. The figure let out a guttural scream, a sound so inhuman it rattled the very walls of the labyrinth. The walls began to collapse, the faces of the trapped souls screaming in unison as the stone cracked and crumbled around them. Asterisk, "What are you doing?" Asterisk, Lucas shouted, grabbing her arm, but Evelyn couldn't stop. The power surged through her, blinding and overwhelming, and at that moment, she knew this was the heart of the labyrinth. This was what it had been hiding all along. With one final burst of energy, the room shattered. The walls crumbled into dust, and the figure dissolved into the air, his screams fading into nothingness. Evelyn collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The light was gone, the noise was gone, everything was gone. When she opened her eyes, they were outside. The mansion was behind them, crumbling into ruins as if it had never existed. The air was cold, but fresh, the moon hanging low in the sky. Lucas was beside her, staring in disbelief. We made it," he asked, his voice shaking. Evelyn nodded weakly, her body trembling. They had escaped, but as she looked back at the ruins, a cold dread settled in her chest. The labyrinth was gone, but the souls it had claimed, they would never be free. And somewhere, deep in the earth, she knew, the labyrinth still waited. It was always waiting,